Hi tubers, it's me again. I just finished a new painting. I actually posted this video of this painting once before, but it wasn't finished, so I'm going to do it again. And I want to talk a little bit about it, because I think I did something really nice this time. Yeah, so like, not often I say that, but this one I like. Also want to say there's now a donation button on my YouTube channel, and some of you actually donated a little bit, and I'm really thankful for that. It's much appreciated. There is also links to my Facebook and web pages and my group, where you can post your paintings and stuff like that. If you like, I will add you if you want to, if you find it. So we can go from here to what I'm going to show you, and it's this one. I did one video before that I put out there, but I wasn't able to finish it because it was in my other studio, so I didn't actually show you how it turned out. And that's what I want to do now, and I think it became quite beautiful. I have painted extremely thick layers of paint to get this light that I was after, and it's almost, if you see it in real life, it's really, this kind of lights up the room. It's almost glowing in the dark, and which means that I have actually managed to do something right. You see how I have used the brush strokes to create all these textures, and not gonna so much into detail because I used a photograph, and in the photograph the details in the hands and nails and stuff are kind of just overexposed, so we can't really see them. Just the light, and also this rose. I think I really got something right, and the colors are a little more intense on the video, I can see now. Then the red becomes a little bit more red, and yellow a little bit more yellow. But I think yeah, I think it became quite nice. As you see, I'm using quite nice framing, quite expensive framing actually, because I liked that the paint, when you use so much time on one painting, I really liked it to have a nice frame, so it can actually kind of hold it in a way. And my paintings are very expressive. They are I'm kind of a closet expressionist, and the way I use the color and texture, they become very present in the room. So it's nice to have a good frame to kind of keep it down, not keep it down, but keep it calm it down a little bit. Yeah. I'm not able to do that when I paint. I just go and paint, and yeah, it becomes what it becomes. Did I forget anything? Of course, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you get something out of it, it really warms my heart, as they say. I like to say warms my head, because I'm an atheist and I know that the heart is only a muscle that pumps blood. Anyway, after this short video, the whole painting process is shown, and I also added some new footage from where I touched up today. I'm gonna deliver it to the customer tomorrow. It's already sold, and sadly the money is already spent. So, but then again, that's how it is to be an artist. So, anyway, I really have to say thank you for watching, and it would be great if you add yourself as a member on my YouTube page and repost my videos on social media. Help me to spread it. If you are a gallerist, you can contact me. I would love to get a gallery in cities like England, London and New York and bigger cities. So if you have a quite nice gallery, I'm open to discuss that. So with I guess with this I say goodbye for now, and there are also more videos coming, and hope you enjoy this one, and I see you.
You're a painter. What's the worst thing that can happen to you? Disgrace? Derision? No, the worst thing is to have to cut up your masterpiece. What have brought Holland's greatest painter to this moment of artistic suicide? Once, Rembrant had been cock of the walk in a city that couldn't get enough of him. Glittering, fat, prosperous Amsterdam. But that was then. Now he's living opposite an amusement park. Drunks throwing up on his doorstep, knife fights every Friday night. But why is he mutilating his painting? It had been hanging on the walls of the Amsterdam Town Hall. But then a decision was made. Take it down. Get something else to fill the space. So now what's he supposed to do with it? This B-movie flop of a picture. Maybe if he can cut it down a little, there'll be someone out there who might like the centre of the painting, the bit with the people in. So under the knife it goes. It's a brutal punishment, the worst. And for what exactly is Rembrandt being punished? For being out of step with modern taste, for painting like a barbarian. But then he isn't interested in refinement and beauty. It bores him. He does us, flesh and blood, you and me, art that exists to tell the truth about the human condition. That's his everlasting glory. But in the end, that's also going to be his problem. Amsterdam in the 1630s, Rembrandt's on a roll. Everything he touches seems to come up trumps. He knows what the patrons want even before they know it themselves, and there's nothing, I mean nothing, he can't turn his hand to. Great, action-packed histories, heart-pumping stories with pop-eyed bystanders, books which seem to breathe and lift with the breath of God, and portraits. Spectacular portraits. They were made made for each other, the painter and the city. Just as no one had ever seen paintings like Rembrandt's, the world had never seen a place quite like Amsterdam. In 1600, it had been a backwater fishing port. 30 years later, when Rembrandt arrived, the docks were unloading Chinese silks, Swedish iron and copper, and the new mass-market addictions, sugar and tobacco. In one generation, the place had gone from provincial also-ran to economic lord of the world. Whatever you wanted, Amsterdam had it, the discount supermarket of the 17th century. So fortunes were made, quick and spectacular, and those who made them were not shy of showing them off. So they built elegant houses on these canals, and into those houses went all the good things. Gold-stamped leather wall coverings, Delft tiles, fine mirrors in rich frames, maps of the worlds they were conquering, and of course pictures, especially pictures of themselves. This is Nicholas Roots, and his business is fur. Russian sable, in fact, the priciest of the lot. Was it his idea, I wonder, or Rembrandt's, that he should brand himself by wearing his stock in trade? In any event, it's a stroke of genius, for this is the hairiest painting imaginable. All that soft fall of fur dropping down his body like a river of luxury. The hairs standing up in a gentle charge of electrostatic, as if a hand has just sensuously travelled through them. Yet for all the sumptuousness, Rembrandt has managed to avoid any impression of idle opulence. With his fastidiously combed whiskers and sharp eyes, almost as sharp as those of the animals from whom the pelts were taken, Roots's glance is that of a slightly impatient intelligence. We almost want to say, thanks for giving us a moment. But he's also solid. The deep shadow cast by the side of his head makes him thoughtful. The slightly pinked inner eyelids, as though he'd sacrificed his sleep for the good of the investors. No wonder J.P. Morgan bought the picture. For has there ever been a better portrait of the businessman as hero? Rembrandt not only understood his rich clients and the image they wanted to project of themselves, he was also a virtuoso manipulator of paint. No one looked harder at the topography of a middle-aged eyelid, the oiliness of a prosperous nose, the wateriness of the eye's vitreous membrane, the shiny tightness of a forehead pulled back into a linen cap. Look at this, Rembrandt's portrait of an 83-year-old woman in the National Gallery in London. Look at the translucent fabric of her bonnet wings, their edges painted with a single stroke. Look at her eyebrow and droopy eyelid done with jabbing strokes. The slightly unfocused melancholy, the mood of poignant vulnerability, everything softening the face of a tough old bird, wistful in the certainty it's not long now before she gets to meet the great accountant in the sky. Not just a painter then, but a psychologist of the human condition, don't you think? What's the job of the other big hitters? Velasquez, Rubens, Van Dyck? To paint masks, the studied look of princes and popes. They know in advance, pretty much, the mask of the day. Martial resolution, regal care, pensive melancholy. But Rembrandt looks behind the pose. And this is what makes his portraits touch us like nobody else's. We can see people putting on their faces to the world. And it doesn't make us less, but more sympathetic to them. You'd think that with his perfect pitch for understanding what the rich of Amsterdam wanted, Rembrandt would have grown up with them. But he hadn't. He'd grown up in Leiden, a textiles and university town about 25 miles southwest of Amsterdam, packed with piety and learning and profit from the cloth trade. Rembrandt's family were millers. The River Rhine flowed past their mill, giving the painter his name, Rembrandt van Rijn. Rembrandt was the bright one in a family of 9 children, the one who went to Latin school and the local university. So dropping out at 14 to become a painter was, I suppose, an act of faith. Mind you, no time for teenage masterpieces. Too busy doing what apprentices had to. Mixing primer, grinding pigment, suspending it in meaty smelling linseed oil. No one, thank God, robbed graves anymore to make black pigment from charred skeletons. They used soot instead. All his life, Rembrandt seemed to love the filmy muck of oil paint. No one in his century ever explored its texture, from thick and crusty to thin and fluid, more lovingly. You can see this plunge into the materials of his craft in this little portrait of himself done in his studio in Leiden in his 20s. Here he is in his work clothes, all around him the tools of the trade. But just look at this place. The plank floor is cracking, the plaster in the corner of the room is peeling, and that of course is the point. It's an old place, a dump really. But it's still the place where a young man connects with an old thing, the making of art. And that's why it moves us strangely. The little gingerbread man in his oversized housecoat, mantled in the trappings of painting. But look at him. He isn't painting at all. He's just staring at something he's hidden from us. A mystery, whose only feature is that intense golden light at the edge of the picture frame. The fire of an idea. What we're looking at, the picture seems to say, is nothing less than a pocket manifesto. The idea that art is the marriage of craft and imagination. No wonder then that with all this cleverness, Rembrandt was talent-spotted, singled out by Constantijn Huygens, the most influential patron in all of Holland, as the coming man, a diamond in the rough. And what Huygens saw in Rembrandt was a superlative storyteller. Take the story of Samson and Delilah. Most artists did Samson as a naked hulk, slumped in post-coital slumber. This is what Rembrandt does. Instead of nude beefcake, he dresses him, and, amazingly, makes him seem more, not less, vulnerable. All his paint wizardry is used on that knot, which seems to tie Samson to his lover, and to his fate. Delilah lifts the lock of Samson's copper hair, ready to be shorn away, but as she does so, her other hand idly strokes his tresses. So in one gesture, Rembrandt gets to the heart of the story, the tragic inseparability of amorous tenderness and brutal betrayal.
Good as he was, Huyckmans thought his protege could be even better if he went to Italy. But Rembrandt wasn't going to put in time sketching statues. He had bigger fish to fry. This was, after all, the Republic of Money, and Amsterdam whispered to him, "Come and get it." So here he was, doing very nicely, thank you, turning out stunning story paintings and portraits to order. And not just a painter either, but also a partner in the art business, Rembrandt Eilenberg Inc. Pupils taken in for a fee, copies made, original paintings commissioned.
So what was it about his partner's niece, young Saskia van Eilenberg, with her butterball chins and lopsided, crinkly grin? A nice girl, certainly, a catch, one would assume, being the orphan daughter of a burgomaster of northern Friesland. She met Rembrandt when she was 21, blessed with a portion of her father's estate. If Rembrandt could have written poems to Saskia, he would have. But instead, he did this precious little drawing to mark their betrothal. She's a child of nature. The straw hat, the wildflowers. Only Rembrandt could have done that dangling broken stalk and thought it was perfect. Whenever he can, he paints her with flowers. She's his flower child.
Mind you, the relatives up north don't like it very much. They hear stories of Rembrandt and Saskia showing off their jewels and fur and fancy outfits, and they nod their heads and say, "Told you so." Always knew he was after her money, and now they're spending it like there's no tomorrow.
For Rembrandt has become a shopaholic. Oh, a shopaholic in the best possible taste. He buys paintings by old masters at auctions, but every so often he hits the Amsterdam equivalent of the Portobello Road, and he just can't stop buying. Japanese armour, Indonesian daggers, plaster busts of Roman emperors, and he tells himself it's all for art. Here's another impulse buy, a pricey four-storey house in one of the more elegant streets in Amsterdam. Not your usual artist's modest residence then. But then, why shouldn't he be extravagant? Rembrandt is, after all, the most successful painter in Holland, and his paintings are hanging in the houses of the richest, most powerful men in the world.
What makes Rembrandt's later falling out with his patrons so surprising is that in his salad days in the 1630s, no one could beat him for grasping exactly what it was the first generation of Amsterdam moneymen really wanted. What they wanted were two contradictory things. On the one hand, the portraits, of course, had to say, we are rich. On the other hand, they had to say, but we are also God-fearing, plain, simple folk who know that riches never last. Every Sunday in church they heard their preachers say to them, do not forget the humble place from which you have come. Do not forget that today's worldly pomp will be tomorrow's dust and ashes. So the paintings had to show them off without making them show-offs. Rembrandt had this rich but modest line down stone cold. So of course they're lining up for him. Not just merchants on the make, but the creme de la creme, the family trip, for example. You don't get much richer than the Trips, who had a global empire of iron, copper and guns, and were doing very nicely, thank you, in the endless wars against Spain. But Elias Tripp, head of the dynasty, thought of himself as a pillar of Protestant society, your old-fashioned, sober-sided, church-going arms trader. So when Rembrandt was hired to paint his hugely rich and marriageable daughter, Maria Tripp, he knew that the display of his hugely rich and marriageable daughter, Maria Tripp, he knew that the display of wealth had to be crushingly subtle. The money, then, was in the detail. Below that milky pud face, with its artless little smile, is a waterfall of stunning lace. Just a hint of the Tripp millions. Now, the relationship between the painter and the painted is a devilishly subtle business. But Rembrandt seemed to be in perfect sync with the money classes, understanding precisely what they wanted, because he wanted it too, and how he wanted it. He must have thought that this mutual admiration would go on forever. Here he is in 1640, 34 years old, dressed to the nines as if he's one with the greatest past masters. He's seen Titian's portrait of the Italian poet Ariosto, and he's gone and put himself in the same pose. The oversized, silky mutton chop sleeve on the aristocratic stone ledge. A picture which would be creamy with self-congratulation, were it not for a trace of wistfulness about his face, as if he can't quite believe all this success. Well, if you think about Rembrandt, you've got to admit he's got nerve. I mean, just look at him. From provincial nobody to the cheekiest painter in the history of art. Always on the edge, Mr. Cleverclogs. But you couldn't rightly call yourself a success in Amsterdam if you just did single-person portraits, no matter how rich the sitters. Amsterdam was a corporate town, a beehive of capitalism, ruled not from palaces, but from boardrooms. So what did the corporate sitters want? Well, first of all, of course, a good likeness of themselves. And then they wanted the artist to get their complicated pecking order just right. The former has to get everyone in. Squeeze, squeeze, jostle, nudge. What are the choices? Well, either elasticate the rectangle until everyone's in, or double up the rows so one lot is on top of the other. Result, the rugby first 15. You could, as Rembrandt's most astute pupil Samuel van Hoogstraten put it, behead them all with a single blow. Now, with his insatiable instinct for stripping off social masks, Rembrandt wasn't going to settle for that. So he says, okay, let's throw away the boardroom lineup. Let's just forget about the stale formula and turn cardboard cutouts into real events, social dramas.
And here's the result, the Night Watch. It was commissioned in 1642 by a company of cloth merchants and part-time militiamen. And as with so many of his paintings at this time, Rembrandt had done the impossible, made something heroic out of the world of merchants and money. Now, everyone knew the militiamen in this painting weren't real soldiers. The real war was being slogged out somewhere beyond the frontiers. These were toy soldiers, Amsterdam's Dad's Army. Still, they liked to preserve the fiction of the citizen soldier. They liked to think they'd be there to defend the freedom of Amsterdam.
Rembrandt's great idea is flattery. Now, it's not the kind of flattery that's going to make them younger or better looking. It's much more important than that. It's the flattery of the entire fairy tale idea behind the painting. The idea that a bunch of overdressed textile men playing toy soldiers on Sundays were the real thing, that they were actually alive with martial energy. So instead of having them pose, Rembrandt has them in action. He transforms them in that way from mere human ornaments into marching, shooting, drumming guardsmen. So just how do you capture that instant when your pulse goes whoosh with excitement? Well, Rembrandt takes a deep breath, he has a what the hell moment, and he goes for it. He changes the usual side-by-side format into a back-to-front action, so that the company of the officers and men are coming right at us, 3D, from a deep, dark doorway, right up to the picture frame, and into our own space, blazing with light.
Look at that spear poking into our space. Rembrandt knows that rough painting can actually convey the illusion of a three-dimensional object better than any literal description. The captain's name is Franz Banning Koch. Next to him is his lieutenant, Willem van Rattenberg. It's the lieutenant who gets the more dazzling costume. Somehow, though, his showiness only strengthens the sense of command of his captain, costumed in black but ablaze with a fiery red sash. Banning Koch is giving the signal to move, so his order falls as a shadow on the coat of his lieutenant. They're off, already in motion, the tassels are flying.
At first sight, the Night Watch seems merely chaotic, doesn't it? But actually, it's a hymn to noisy energy contained by discipline, freedom and order, miraculously held together, much as I think Rembrandt thought the Dutch themselves did. That's the secret of their success. That is the glory of Amsterdam.
But did they see it? The Sunday soldiers? Did the men who actually paid for the picture get beyond vanity, beyond their need for a realistic depiction of themselves?
According to Rembrandt's pupil, Jan Holstra, some of the sitters were less than thrilled. Not outraged, just a bit bewildered. You could almost hear them saying, well, it's got to be good. It's a Rembrandt after all. And what do I know about art? But to me it does look a bit of a mishmash. Let's just say that the climate went from warm to tepid. Perhaps Rembrandt felt it, perhaps not. But for the first time since becoming the golden boy of Dutch painting, one of Rembrandt's patrons is so unhappy with the painting, he simply refused to pay. And not just any old patron either, but Andries de Graaf, a man from whom jobs and prestige flowed. We don't know exactly what it was that offended de Graaf so much, but we can guess, with Rembrandt painting ever more freely, it didn't quite match de Graaf's stately self-image. To recover his money, Rembrandt had to resort to something he must have found deeply humiliating. An arbitration committee of his peers who sat in judgment on the quality of his painting. 2 years later, Rembrandt took revenge in a crude but eloquent little drawing. It features a bunch of connoisseurs peering at pictures, one of whom, whose features aren't 100 miles away from de Graaf, has sprouted ass's ears. Another figure, surely the artist, lets us know in no uncertain terms with his trousers down just what he thinks of their judgment. But it was Rembrandt who all of a sudden seemed to be giving off a bad smell. The smell of someone from whom the fickle goddess Fortune was shying away. Have you ever felt at the top of your form, at the height of your powers, an odd but distinct sense that the wind's just changed direction? It's blowing a bit chillier now. Rembrandt's troubles came to him unremarkably, like the first heavy drops of rain striking a window pane. A mild disturbance, but then a downpour. The portrait commissions dry up, the house is loaded with debt, and inside the house Saskia is deathly ill with TB, her body racked by spasms of bloody coughing. Death was no stranger to their family. Saskia and Rembrandt had already buried 3 of their children. Only the boy Titus was alive. On the 5th of June 1642, a notary was called to the house to record Saskia's will. 9 days later, she was dead. Her body was wrapped in a simple cloth, and in a silent little procession, it was taken to the Oude Kerk for burial. Somewhere in this house, Rembrandt pulled out a portrait of her that he'd begun many years before, at the playful start of their life together. It's unusual for many reasons, one of the only paintings in which there's not a trace of a smile. Her head is turned in profile, the outline un-Rembrandtian in its enamel-like sharpness. But for the last time, he's loaded her with fabric and jewels. It's as if he can't stop draping her. But Saskia pulls the fur cape around her as if to ward off the chill of mortality. But it's too late. Well then, Saskia had gone, and it was as though a peal of bells had abruptly stopped. It's too easy, we're told, to say that in that year, 1642, everything changed for Rembrandt, for his work. That's the sentimental, romantic version to read art from life. But you know, something really had happened to Rembrandt. An end to flamboyance, an end to his theatrical mastery of the outward, noisy show of life. It was as though he turned down the volume of the world and switched on an inner, quiet radiance.
The big gestures melt away and are replaced by a tender simplicity. Instead of a portrait gallery of the rich and powerful, a maidservant leaning on a sill, caught between inside and outside, innocence and sex. Look at the highlight on her lower lip, the left hand toying with a necklace. Here too, in his drawings, just a few summary lines here and there that manage to conjure up an entire scene. It's a huge compliment, don't you think? Making us his partner in completion, giving us the benefit of the doubt that we wouldn't want anything so boring as the literal details. The problem, though, was that Rembrandt's critics didn't see him as offensively avant-garde. They saw him as offensively old-fashioned. Why? Because of a cultural sea change. For the first time in Holland, sophistication seemed far more important than simplicity and piety, the qualities the Dutch liked to think brought them through their war against Spain. But now, peace had been declared, and by the 1650s there was a perceptible sigh of relief. So just as Rembrandt's paintings were getting darker, the mood of Amsterdam was lightening and brightening. The founding fathers and mothers, modestly dressed in millstone ruffs, had given way to their children. The peacock generation, gorgeous in screaming scarlets and coiffed to the nines. Many of them had been sent abroad as part of their education and had come back eager to import cosmopolitan stylishness to the homespun republic. They were interested in austerity. They wanted to be like the Italians. They wanted pillars. All Rembrandt's murky browns and golds, those garter marks and flabby breasts, were a downer.
We all know this story, don't we? The second generation, the inheritors, the trust fund brats, so embarrassed by their parents who are so old-fashioned, so parochial. All they care about is church and business, business and church. And what a business too, trade, my dear, so tawdry. So off they go and buy themselves country villas, while some inky-fingered clerk manages the family investment. This leads them to concentrate on what they really care about, cultivation. For art, they think, is not just a report unedited from nature. And it's certainly not about dwelling indiscriminately on ugliness just because it happens to be there. No, art is the divine road to harmony, its purity, its clarity. Away with the misshapen, bring on the age of refinement.
And here's Rembrandt. No culture props, just those big, meaty hands stuck in his belt. Everything is starting to look heroically worn. The coat itself, the eyes pink-rimmed, the eyes of a man who never stops looking. And just look at the sketchiness of the whole thing. He just doesn't care about finish anymore. In fact, Rembrandt's in the process of doing something which horrified the classical academicians. He's abolishing the difference between a sketch and a painting. And he does it for the subjects he cares most about. He cares a lot about her. She's Hendrika Stoffels, the soldier's girl from the sticks, who came into Rembrandt's house 7 years after Saskia's death.
Rembrandt had already taken his son's nurse, Geertje Dirks, as his mistress. But then Hendrika arrived, and it wasn't long before he wanted her in his bed and Geertje out of it.
Here's Hendrika looking down into the water, the break of her legs through its surface, a little tour de force of illusionism. Rembrandt now isn't choosing his way of handling paint just as the fancy takes him, but to convey sensuous experience. So Hendrika's shift, pulled scandalously high, her neckline scandalously low, are painted thickly, while her skin tones are as liquid as the water itself. And the way Rembrandt has painted her hands as just an unmodelled smear almost dares the critics to make an issue of it.
You can hear them, can't you? Rembrandt van Rijn, oh yes, very talented, but my God, so difficult. Never finishes a painting. I think his best years are behind him, don't you? And what he's doing, rattling around in that big old house with his, excuse me, a woman, really don't know. You have heard, she's with child, haven't you? Churchdeacon's quite shocked. Just a bit squalid, don't you think? That might explain why he does those rather peculiar etchings. Just who's going to buy them, I have really no idea.
Running out of favours, running out of time, late with his loan repayments on the house, the coils of Rembrandt's ruin began to rope themselves around him ever more tightly. Finally, in July 1656, Rembrandt filed for bankruptcy.
This is where Rembrandt would have come, to the chamber of insolvency. Passing through this door with its frieze of worthless stock certificates and rats scuttling through empty money chests of the profligate debtor. You just can't beat the Dutch for wagging their fingers at your wicked ways.
Auction by auction, hammer blow by hammer blow, everything was taken. This wasn't just furniture, household stuff. It was also Rembrandt's own personal archive of art. The drawings and paintings, all the strange, fabulous stuff he'd collected, all gone. Then, the house itself.
One thing he did manage to hold on to, and that was a great mirror in the finest ebony wood frame. Titus, his son, found a bargeman who said, for a sum of money, sure, he'd carry it to their new house. So up on the bargeman's head it went, and off through the jostle of Amsterdam over cobbled streets and bridges. And at some point, the bargeman begins to sweat, his hands get slippery, his grip gets shaky. And then, as the bargeman was stepping off a bridge, Witnesses who came forward to testify for the bargeman said he hadn't bumped into anyone, he hadn't fallen down. The mirror must just have broken all by itself. But there it was, on the ground, 1,000 shards and slivers, leaving Titus to carry home to his father just a frame with an empty centre. It's 1658. Rembrandt has lost everything. So how does he paint himself? Like a king, like a god, full frontal, mantled in lustrous gold. And it's the paint, that thick, luxurious paint, which gives him his power, his magic. No bankrupt's downcast eyes either, but a stare coming right at us little people who fancy we know something about art. A suggestion of lordly amusement playing about his eyes. His barrel chest soaks up the light, the belly swelling in front of us like a genie, the whole body pressing against the picture plane, challenging it to contain his massive authority. And if Rembrandt thinks that his way of painting has been part of the problem, he's certainly not going to abandon it now. Just the opposite, in fact. This is a painting that bellows defiance at the apostles of crisp clarity and contour. So you think that stuff was a bit much, do you? He seems to be saying, just get a load of this. That with painting this free and this rough, it would be downhill all the way for Rembrandt. But it wasn't. With almost everything gone, reputation, possessions, house, he still had a chance for a comeback. The comeback to end all comebacks. This, the new town hall, had just been built, and the cream of Amsterdam painters were asked to supply pictures for its interior. Against all odds, Rembrandt was one of them.
Town Hall doesn't quite describe this place, does it? It's something more than clerks and marriage licenses. Though The Hague is officially the seat of government, everyone knows Amsterdam is where the money is. So the new Town Hall is a shameless brag to the world about the great metropolis, built on a scale that makes the Doge's palace in Venice look skimpy.
In this solemnly beautiful setting, tone was all important. Any new paintings were going to have to be restrained, severely classical, pictorially well behaved, which doesn't exactly spell Rembrandt, does it? In fact, anyone but Rembrandt.
So of course, at first, the job went to someone far more reliable, the painter Govert Flinck. It was only when Flinck suddenly died that someone in the council chamber dared to say the R word. No doubt greeted by silence, and then perhaps, oh why not? He's broke, he needs the work, he'll behave. When does he not deliver the goods when it really counted?
So, after getting the commission by the back door, Rembrandt set about work on the painting. The result would be, I think, the greatest triumph of his visual imagination. But it would also be his most shocking disaster. The painting was supposed to hang here, in one of the great arch spaces by the main hall. And what the burgomasters wanted was a stirring depiction of the legendary story of how the Dutch nation came to be born. It was a history that every child in the Dutch Republic would have known, as important to them as Boudicca is to us. The ancient Dutch, known as the Batavians, had their rebellion against the Romans too, and their leader was called Claudius Civilis.
The story goes like this. Claudius had been fighting on the side of the Romans against his own people. But at some point, he has a change of heart. He decides there's been one tax too many. His country bled white. So he switches sides. He summons a meeting of tribal chiefs, declares a revolt, and swears them to join him. They take the oath. The die is cast. Blood happens.
It's a stirring story, but remember who commissioned it? The establishment. Oh yes, on a rebellion, but only when it was a long time ago, and only in the most respectable way. The assumption was they'd get a respectable painting. What they got was this.
Ugliness, deformity, barbarism, a bunch of cackling louts, onion chewers, bloody-minded rebels, the paint slashed and stabbed, caked on like the makeup of warriors.
But that's what rebellion is all about, Rembrandt thought. He didn't think rebels were gentlemen. Here's the rebel leader with a wound in his face where his eye used to be. So what if the rules of art said you had to hide a blind eye behind some decorous profile? Rembrandt says, no, I'm going to stick this blind eye right in the middle of your face. That was what wild, rough and free painting did. Goes together with a sword from hell and a cup, maybe of wine, maybe of blood. Needless to say, it seems hardly likely that the grand unveiling went down at all well.
I mean, just look at it. This is a painting drunk on its own wildness. Nothing refined about this.
So down it came, deposed, disgraced, expelled. And down on his knees went Rembrandt, chopping up his masterpiece, hoping against hope that someone would buy a piece of it. Fat chance.
The Claudius Civilis would not just be the ruin of Rembrandt's comeback. It would also be the ruin of his greatest vision.
Or so I think. I can't be sure. None of us can, because we don't really know what the big picture looked like. What we're looking at here is a fragment, a fifth of the original size, the bit rescued from Rembrandt's knife.
All that we have left of the complete painting is the sketch Rembrandt made with prophetic irony on the back of an invitation to a funeral. But this precious scrap is enough to let us see the visionary grandeur of the painting's design, with its vast hall open to the trees, a barbarian king's lair. No wonder you think of the Last Supper when you see this picture, for Rembrandt has painted a secular altarpiece, mysterious, dangerous, joyously profane. No halo, but a bath of burning golden light. No candles, just the power surge of freedom. The fire of an idea. And you're thinking that it looks unfinished, aggressively rough, a work in progress. But Rembrandt's saying, in a voice that's a visual roar, that's you, a city, a country, a work in progress. This is my group portrait of all of you, a portrait of a people, a portrait of who you are, who you've always been.
Let the high and mighty celebrate their greatness with fastidious etiquette. Let them even copy the rest of Europe if they must. But Rembrandt, the bankrupt, the has-been, was their patriotic conscience. Smother yourself in fashion at your peril, he was saying. These are your flesh and blood, rough and honest, your barbarian ancestry. They made you Dutch, so banish your embarrassment, embrace them, honour them. But everything you think matters doesn't. The town hall with all its acres of marble can go tomorrow. Amsterdam can sink back into the sea again. As long as you have your rough freedom, you have all you need to stay Dutch.
So of course Rembrandt's not going to paint by the rule book. Instead, he does the roughest, toughest history painting ever. An old lion's roar of a picture. He had every incentive to paint it straight, but something in him just wouldn't do it. This is what drives the very greatest art, contempt for ingratiation.
Now Rembrandt had learnt this the hard way, when the callow hand of fashion had given him a resounding thumbs down, and when his relationship with the rich of Amsterdam had turned sour, and he'd been stripped not just of his fortune, but of his illusions. Giving them what they wanted was now beside the point. Giving them what they needed was more like it. But they refused to look, and that's why he cut up his masterpiece.
One of the very last pictures Rembrandt painted was Simeon the priest being brought the Christ child by the prophetess Anna, a story he'd done before in his youth. But then the painting had been sharp. Now it was dense and textured, almost as if it was woven, not painted. Out of the face of the Christ child pours a soft, brimming radiance, which falls on the face of the old man, who, with his eyes closed, understands at last he has, in fact, seen the light. Rembrandt's patrons, alas, did not. The painting was one of those found in Rembrandt's house when he died on October the 2nd, 1669. It's always been thought of as unfinished. Somewhere in that dim little house was another painting the world thought of as shockingly unfinished, a mutilated stump of a picture. This just may be the most heartbreaking fragment in the entire history of painting. And just because you can see, can't you, that it looks nothing whatsoever like an old master, that it leaps from the decorum of the gallery wall into some other world of eloquence. Rembrandt's Claudius Civilis tells us that the very greatest painting isn't bound by time or taste. A reminder, if ever we should need it, that eloquence doesn't always come with a pretty face.
In a small town in the south of Holland, a group of men, a few children and a dog are preparing to act out a masterpiece of Western art. The picture they're about to impersonate is The Night Watch, painted by Rembrant van Rijn in 1642. The Night Watch shows a group of Amsterdam civic guardsmen led by their captain Frans Banning Kok and his lieutenant Willem van Ruytenberg.
It is such a huge skill, it's such a massive painting. It weighs now 337 kilograms.
For the Dutch people, the Night Watch is an object of pilgrimage.
As a Dutch person, you're obliged to see the Night Watch at least once in your life. It's like going to Mecca.
They make me think of the Home Guard squadron in the old television programme Dad's Army, and with Frans Banning Kok as a Captain Mannering figure who's perhaps a little bit pompous.
The Night Watch has had a highly eventful life. For a start, it's not quite the picture Rembrandt intended us to see. There are bits missing. It's been slashed with a knife. It's had acid thrown at it and been drenched with water. And it shouldn't really be called the Night Watch at all. Over 1 million people visit the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam every year, and most of them head for this painting.
The visitor entering the Rijksmuseum today walks into a brightly lit front gallery with a museum shop, then turns and looks into a gallery of honor, which is built along the lines of the nave of a Gothic church. At the end, where you would expect the altar, there hangs the Night Watch. The visitor knows immediately he is there, and there is the great icon of Dutch art.
Drum rolls, a barking dog, a rifle shot, guardsmen talking, the clatter of weapons, the captain shouting a command. These are the sounds.
The Night Watch is a monumental work, over 11 feet high and more than 14 feet wide. Visitors to the museum soon discover it's a complex and intriguing picture.
That hand, it really draws in the viewer, as though he's about to introduce the people in the painting. But it's cryptic. It seems vaguely military, but then you wonder what's this little girl doing in the midst of all these men.
You are part of the group when you're looking at it. And that, I like that. Because that is a picture, that's a picture. This is you go into it. I love that.
These people are watching us. When I look at it, and the whole picture is like a mirror. I could watch it for hours.
It's the detail. Although the dog is a little off. The dog is off. But it's the detail, it's the expression on everybody's face and how it comes together. You don't see things like that every day, and of course for that time, it's incredible.
In the 17th century, this building in Amsterdam was the meeting place of the Cloveniers, or Musketeers, militia guild. It was called the Cloveniersdoelen. Here, Frans Banning Koch and his men socialized and practiced on their shooting range. It was the civic militia's job to defend the city from attack and to maintain law and order on the streets. But by the time of the painting, the job had become largely ceremonial. The guardsmen dressed up and paraded on festive occasions, but the only real qualification required was a healthy appetite.
As far as the practical, original purposes are concerned, namely defense against the enemy, attack, and also protection of the city against fire and so on, there was very little that was asked of the members at that time. They came together, they had a good time, they had extensive meals, and I'm sure they had a good glass of wine.
The civic militia guilds had a long-standing tradition of commissioning group portraits to hang on the walls of their meeting places. The first such paintings were done in the early 1500s, and the last ones not long after Rembrandt finished The Night Watch. A particular style developed, and many of these large canvases show the guardsmen lined up formally in serried ranks. As one contemporary put it, as if they could all be decapitated with just one stroke of a sword.
The genre of group portraits of militia companies, to which the Night Watch belongs, is a very awkward one in some ways, because the painter had a big problem, because militia companies are quite large and they paid individually for their portraits, and so you might have to include 30 men. It's a bit like organising a group photograph today, and everyone knows that the results tend to be rather stiff and formal and unnatural.
In the 1630s, the Cloveniersdoelen was extended with a new Great Hall, one of the largest rooms in the city. Amsterdam's leading artists were commissioned to paint 6 group portraits to fill its blank walls. When Rembrandt took the commission to paint Banning Koch's company, he had absolutely no intention of following tradition.
Our picture will be next. Oh, come on, let's go and settle it. Yes.
Rembrandt looked at this tradition. He thought, what I can do is take this traditional format and I can change it. And so he takes this commission and he reinterprets it, and interprets it as if it were a great history painting, by which I mean a subject from the Bible or a subject from classical mythology. So he imbues it with all the drama, all the eventfulness, all the vivid lighting that he applies to the composition, and that is the significance of The Night Watch.
Rembrandt approached it in a revolutionary way. He really wanted to get rid of the idea of that it was a group portrait. He introduced double the amount of people as he had to portray, actually, just to make it into a crowd, and then let the crowd behave in its own way, and people act and not just pose.
Many of the men shown in The Night Watch were successful merchants, and each paid Rembrandt about 100 guilders to be included in the painting. It's possible that Frans Banning Koch and Willem van Ruytenberg paid more for their prominent positions. In all, Rembrandt must have received at least 1,600 guilders for his work, a solid sum. As befits his rank, the captain of the company, Frans Banning Koch, is dressed in black, with a red sash across his chest. He was an ambitious man, who became burgomaster or Lord Mayor of Amsterdam. Next to him stands his lieutenant, Willem van Ruytenberg. He's far more flamboyantly dressed, and in his left hand he carries a partisan, a halberd associated with his rank. He also had a successful career in Amsterdam politics. Only a few of the other men can be identified by name. The sergeant on the right was Rombout Kemp, a cloth merchant and a leading churchman. The sergeant on the left was Reinier Engelen, another cloth merchant. And the ensign, the man proudly carrying the company banner, was Jan Cornelis Vischer, a young man who spent much of his family's money on books and works of art. These were rich men, living in one of the wealthiest cities in the world in the middle of the 17th century. And for an ambitious young artist like Rembrandt, Amsterdam was the place to be. He moved there in the early 1630s, when he was just 26 years old. But he was already a much sought-after painter, especially for portraits.
Rembrandt came to Amsterdam as a renowned young artist. He was commanding the highest prices in the city. His rate for a single portrait was about 100 guilders. For a standing full-length portrait, about 500 guilders, and for a double portrait he might get as much as 800 guilders. And this was in a time when a median income was about 500 guilders. So he was earning extremely well. His fame in Amsterdam was made from the moment of his arrival.
One of his earliest paintings in Amsterdam showed a renowned surgeon giving an anatomy lesson. It pointed the way to what the artist would do in the night watch.
The anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp was painted in 1632 and in a way was his first great calling card in Amsterdam. I mean, this was the picture that established his reputation. The lighting is powerful in the manner we see 10 years later in the night watch. So you do get this strong spotlight on the corpse in the foreground, and then the light reflected onto the faces. And the technique, the way it's painted, this intensely lively and lifelike characterization of the heads, which is what Rembrandt became famous for. And that's what he announces in the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp.
In Amsterdam, Rembrandt had met and married Saskia Eilenberg. She'd inherited a large fortune, and with the good money that Rembrandt was earning from his paintings, the young couple lived the good life. In 1639, Rembrandt paid the huge sum of 13,000 guilders for a grand house, now the Rembrandt House Museum, in a very fashionable quarter of Amsterdam. The house was nobly furnished and decorated with Rembrandt's own collection of paintings.
We catch him at the moment of the night watch. You know, he's absolutely on top of Amsterdam. I mean, he's the most successful artist, he's enormously famous, he's very, very ambitious, and he knows he's very special. And that's why you get this enormous ambition of what he was trying to do with the night watch.
It wasn't just the scale of the work that reflected his ambition. Rembrandt's great achievement in the night watch was to turn a static tableau into a painting simmering with action and movement. With the men dressed up as if ready to parade at some festivity, the picture captures the very moment when Banning Cock instructs his lieutenant to give the order to march the men out. His mouth is slightly open as he speaks, and behind him the company springs into life.
He's ordering them to go marching, and that's the exact moment that the sergeant is turning his head, that the standard bearer is raising his flag. The drummer starts drumming, and as a result of this, the dog starts barking. A boy on the left starts running. So everybody's starting to do something. You have the feeling that you just came at the right moment to admire that perfect composition. One moment later and the whole composition would have gone.
Basically, there are two aspects to the movement and the action. One is the movement of the whole composition. There is the central group that comes out. There is a group in back that follows the central group. There are persons at the left that are acting, and on the right there is action. And that's composed in a whole lively group. There is no stationary element in the main feature of the painting.
When we say it's a painting that has a great sense of movement in it, the reason it does is because of the movement of our eyes when we're looking at it, and the fact that we just don't know where really we should look, and we're restless. It makes us restless.
Sometimes with little details that one doesn't immediately realize that they are there. But for instance, the sash of Banning Cock he has at the bottom of his legs, I mean, that moves in space. Also the ensign who is standing in the back, the tie he has around his neck, it moves. It is that type of little detail that he emphasizes in order to create the impression of movement.
Even as he persuaded movement into the picture, Rembrandt also created the illusion of captain and lieutenant stepping outward from the frame. Each has his back foot raised, and Banningcock's hand is thrust forward, casting a strong shadow on the lieutenant's tunic. Not an accidental shadow, as we'll see. The partisan in Van Reichenberg's hand seems also to thrust towards us, as if over the footlights of a stage. Rembrandt made few changes to the Night Watch, but this was a detail that he worked on intensively to produce a remarkable three-dimensional effect.
The wonderful thing about the X-ray is that you can follow Rembrandt's thinking. Here you really see him think by painting the partisan very foreshortened originally. We can see here that there are three different phases in painting it, this being the first one. And apparently he wanted it to come out even more dramatically into space than it is now. But apparently it didn't really work, and so he decided to turn it a little bit in space to that phase, and even a little bit further here, still maintaining that wonderful foreshortening we have, but not as radical as he apparently originally had planned.
The weapon that characterized the Cloveniers militia guild was the clover, a type of musket. And Rembrandt has depicted two of the guardsmen in classic drill positions. One fills his musket with powder, and another blows his gun clean. X-rays show that this was another area of the painting where Rembrandt worked and reworked.
Here I am standing with these two men in one space on the same floor. I'm very close to Mr. Reichenberg, and I see a rather sturdy, short man with broad shoulders. In the painting itself, you will see that part of that shoulder has been painted away by Rembrandt, and I'm sure that had to do with the fact that there is this wonderful piece of mechanic which had to be also worked out in the painting. It shouldn't be covered by that shoulder. Although Reichenberg is one of the main figures, maybe this soldier cleaning his gun is even a more important figure, because he represents what the militiamen were trained for. So poor Reichenberg has to sacrifice part of his shoulder to enable Rembrandt to paint that part of the musket.
The Night Watch broke all the conventions of civic guard portraits. With his suggestions of movement and dramatic use of light, Rembrandt had created a piece of real theatre. And he took further liberties when he added several extra uninvited characters into his composition.
The additional figures, the figures who didn't pay to be in the picture, give incident, I think, to the painting. This is again, this attempt to get away from the traditional format, to put in additional figures who give incident and drama, and that's their function.
The drummer was not a member of Banningcock's company. On the left, a young boy, a powder monkey, hurries to bring the musketeers a supply of gunpowder. A musketeer, almost hidden behind the captain, actually fires his gun. Other extras appear just as half-faces, filling out gaps in the composition and heightening the sense of a crowd. But perhaps the strangest extra that Rembrandt has introduced is the little girl in the richly decorated golden dress. She's a piece of sheer magic.
The little girl is one of the most startling, unexpected presences. He wanted to surprise people. He didn't want his painting to look like you'd expect a militia painting to look like. And what's the most surprising thing you could have in a painting of a militia company? Well, it's a little girl. She doesn't belong in this masculine world at all. And her presence is not natural. There's something supernatural about her presence. She seems to be lit from within. She seems to glow.
The little girl is a focal point in the painting. Our eyes are drawn towards her. But she also has an important symbolic role. Hanging on her belt is a chicken, with its splayed claws prominently showing. With its splayed claws prominently showing.
The claw of a bird was the symbol, was the logo, so to say, of the militia company. In the Middle Ages it was actually the claw of an eagle. So she personifies, if you want, the company.
Who was this little girl? A neighbour's child? The daughter of a militiaman? The image of Rembrandt's wife? No one knows to this day. Rembrandt has also represented the duties of the militia company in a tiny symbolic detail. As that apparently stray shadow from Banningcock's hand falls on the embroidery of the lieutenant's tunic, his fingers and thumb enclose a lion with a city coat of arms. The captain, so to speak, is holding the city, in a gesture of security that says, these men are truly the guardians of Amsterdam. Rembrandt signed his name on the night watch in 1642. Popular stories have it that the picture was not well received by the guardsmen or their families.
I request you to unveil Rembrandt von Rhein's masterpiece.
A myth has grown up about the Night Watch, that it's a painting which satirises the people it depicts, that they didn't like it, that it was really a bit disturbing, a bit subversive, that he was laughing at the good burghers of Amsterdam.
That helmet might be mine. No, it must be those legs.
And a fine pair of legs for all that money. You've given Banningcock a clubfoot.
Robert Kemp a hunchback. Robert Kemp? Where? Is that supposed to be me?
As far as we know, there is no truth in the idea that the picture was not admired at the time and that it was rejected in some way by the sitters. We know that they all paid up. They were all perfectly happy that the picture was shown in the Cloveniers-Doelen, and as far as we know, they stood in front of it proudly.
Rembrandt's pupil, Samuel van Hoogstraten, wrote a brilliant little piece about it in his artistic treatise, in which he suggested that there might have been some complaint about the place of the minor figures. He said he wished that Rembrandt had paid more attention to the details and a little less attention to the vision in his own imagination, and also he wished that it was lit somewhat better.
Perhaps some of the militiamen did have cause to be disconcerted by their portraits. Many of Rembrandt's faces were unlike the conventionally realised likenesses seen in other pictures for the new Great Hall.
Clearly, if your grandchild is coming along to the Cloveniers-Doelen and you want to point out your own portrait, and I'm sure this is the kind of function that these portraits used to have, then it would be much easier to do it in the Cerebro type of picture than it would be in the Night Watch, because there you emerge slightly from the murk.
At the top of the Night Watch is a shield bearing the names of the principal men portrayed. It's not Rembrandt's work, and was added about 8 years after the painting was first unveiled.
It might have had something to do with the feeling that not all the guardsmen were sufficiently recognizable in the painting. On the shield, they do all get equal treatment. That is, in a way, an answer to the kind of criticism that would say that they were treated unequally in their visual appearance in the group portrait.
But Banningcock himself must have been happy with the painting, since he commissioned a personal copy from Herod Lundens, an artist renowned for his miniatures. It's painted in oil on a wood panel, and is just 1/36 the size of the original. The captain also ordered a watercolour impression for the Banningcock family album. The Night Watch remained in the Great Hall for over 70 years, but then it was moved to the new Amsterdam Town Hall, now a royal palace. There was perpetrated one of the most extraordinary acts of official vandalism in the history of Dutch painting. Rembrandt's masterpiece was too big for its allotted space, and so, like a piece of wallpaper, it was simply trimmed to fit.
It is the most important painting, but it's interesting to see that when it was moved in 1715 and had to hang between two doors, the city wasn't too afraid just to take the scissors and cut part of it.
Yet thanks to Banningcock's vanity in ordering a copy of the painting, it's possible to see what Rembrandt's original composition lost in the butchery. The top of the arch is missing from the night watch we see today. At the bottom of the picture, there's now less space for Van Kock and Van Reichenberg to step out into. A narrow strip has gone from the right-hand side. But the biggest cut was on the left of the picture. The sergeant has lost the plume of his helmet, and two guardsmen have gone completely.
I think especially the left side being cut off made a big change. One can't actually see anymore that they're marching out into space. There was a fantastic indication for that, which was a balustrade which ran diagonally out towards the left side of the painting, and that created a fantastic sense of space. That sense is lacking now, and I think that it had a much larger impact on the composition than is often said.
When it was completed, the painting had no title beyond a description, and it wasn't till the end of the 18th century that it got called the Night Watch. By then, the pigments and the varnish layer had darkened so much that there was some confusion over what the scene actually represented.
It's called the Night Watch, but it's not a night watch. These parades happen during the day. It's called the Night Watch for several reasons. Probably. One is because the painting is so dark, and it even became darker because of the varnish. Another reason may be that the moment a title was coined with the general public, there were no day watches anymore, but there were still night watches, and so that's how the title came into being.
When the Night Watch was given a thorough cleaning in the 1940s, some people suggested that the masterpiece should be given a historically accurate name. But whatever the realities of the matter, the Day Watch doesn't have quite the same ring, and the proposal to call it March of Soldiers of the Civic Guard fell understandably flat. So the Night Watch it's remained. The painting was moved to its present home and to a new level of fame when the Rijksmuseum building was opened in 1885. Its architect, Pierre Cuypers, wanted to create a great temple for the whole of Dutch art and history. The facade of the museum, bearing the names of Dutch towns and cities and busts of Dutch artists, shows this. And at the very heart of the new building, Cuypers placed the Night Watch. This was a highly symbolic act, which turned the painting into a national icon.
The Night Watch assumed an extreme importance in the way the Dutch saw themselves at the end of the 19th century, and hence its position within the Rijksmuseum. To some degree, the whole Rijksmuseum is built around the Night Watch. And they created a huge mythology around the figure of Rembrandt, and in a way you see that then in the Rijksmuseum, the architecture of the Rijksmuseum, the way that the Night Watch, taken to be the greatest picture by the great iconic artist of the Netherlands, was placed, as it were, in the inner sanctum, the great altarpiece on the great altar of Dutch nationalism.
As the Night Watch was given its place of honour, the Dutch began to worry about something. The painting was lit from above, but some Dutch art historians said that it should be lit from the side. A great debate raged in Holland. Newspaper cartoonists had a field day, offering their own eccentric solutions. One of them came up with a perfect piece of lateral thinking: hang the Night Watch on its side, thereby getting top lighting and side lighting at the same time. Visitors to the museum would surely put up with the inconvenience. Stiff necks after the visit, says the caption.
In 1902, a committee was formed, and of 20 art historians, and they decided that the painting was best lit from the side. And that actually had the effect that the museum decided, although it had only been finished for about 15 years, to build an extension to the museum, which was a big piece of masterwork because it had to be an extension over the tunnel that runs under the museum. So that actually shows the huge national importance attached to the picture, that there was actually an extension built in order to light it better.
Nothing has ever been too much trouble for the Dutch where the night watch is concerned. And yet today, the painting is back in its old place, lit from above. Its permanent presence within the Rijksmuseum for over 100 years is part of the national appeal of the night watch. In fact, the Dutch have only let it leave the building twice. The first time was in 1898, when Princess Wilhelmina was crowned Queen of the Netherlands. To celebrate the coronation, a blockbuster exhibition of Rembrandt's work was held at the Stedelijk, the neighbouring municipal museum of Amsterdam. As paintings came from all over Europe, the night watch was wheeled a few hundred yards down the road from the Rijksmuseum. Once again, the huge size of the painting presented a problem. It was too big to get through any door, so the great national treasure of Holland was hauled in through a window. Fortunately, this time they decided to enlarge the window rather than shrink the picture. When the night watch left the Rijksmuseum for its second time, it was under far less happy circumstances. In the autumn of 1939, the Dutch mobilized for war, and the Rijksmuseum was cleared of its collection. The night watch was taken from its heavy frame, and like other large paintings, lowered to ground level through a special slit cut into the museum brickwork. It was put onto a truck used for carrying large sheets of glass, and the convoy with an escort of police motorcyclists set off for Radboud Castle, about 40 miles from Amsterdam. There, excited preparations were being made, according to an account written by Sergeant Joseph Huytink.
We were summoned to the captain in the afternoon, and he was acting very secretively. He told me I would have to stand as captain of the watch, and that the same afternoon some very precious paintings from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam would arrive. I heard that among them would be The Night Watch by Rembrandt van Rijn.
The night watch ended that journey stacked in the main hall at Radboud Castle. And then the real danger arrived. When the Germans invaded in 1940, the Dutch decided to move the night watch again to special halts under the sand dunes on the North Sea coast. On the way there, the painting spent one night in a blacksmith's shed and survived a perilous voyage on a boat when a storm nearly blew it over. And once again, size mattered. The entrance to the vault was far too small for the night watch, and so, in the open air, the painting was taken off its stretcher, rolled up round a cylinder, and carried inside. Then the sand dunes became unsafe, and the Dutch decided they must move it to a yet more secure place. They took it across Holland to caves near Maastricht, deep in St. Petersburg Hill.
I'm here inside this St. Petersburg Hill, where in the Second World War many Dutch paintings were hidden in a bomb-proof safe. The transport of the night watch took place at 1942, March the 24th. I will open now the door of the safe, where this famous painting was hidden during 3 years and a half. This is the place where the night watch was kept, turned around a cylinder and put into a wooden box.
This was the final wartime bolt hole for Banningcock's men, guarded by the inheritors of their tradition, the Dutch military police. When peace came, the night watch began its long journey home by canal barge. Because of obstructions in the Dutch waterways, a detour was made into Belgium, the only time the night watch has ever left its native Holland. It must have been a tense moment when the night watch was first inspected after 5 years rolled up on a cylinder. But despite all it had been through, the painting was in remarkably good condition and soon resumed its sacred position in the Rijksmuseum. Ironically, back there in peacetime, it was to suffer damage far worse than anything inflicted on it during the war. An unemployed schoolteacher called Willem de Rijk in 1975 took up a carving knife and slashed the painting. Claiming he was inspired by powers beyond this earth, he aimed at Banningcock, whom he thought to be the devil in his black uniform.
There were 12 cuts in the paint layer, and some of them were really through the canvas. And on one part there was a triangular piece which was fallen out and was found on the floor. So it looked really, also with scratches, but real cuts it has.
Quick action was called for, because otherwise the canvas might have begun to sag. First of all, the triangle that had been cut out of Banningcock's breeches was replaced, after which the parts of the canvas that were hanging loose were secured.
The whole delicate process of restoration was recorded on film by the Rijksmuseum, so the Dutch people could actually see the care that was being taken with their national treasure.
The painting was taken out of its frame and laid on a specially made work surface on the floor.
We had to take the painting down, we had to lay it flat, so face down. And then the relining canvas was taken off, was pulled away. And then we had the cuts at the back, and they were all stitched with very, very little thin threads, adhesive, epoxy resin. And as soon as they were hard, we thinned them, so you wouldn't get a deformation at the front side.
While wax and resin were being melted together, the frame, with the relining stretched over it, was laid on the back of the night watch. Then the linen could be attached to it using the relining adhesive.
The people who did the work were lying on a bridge over the painting because it's so huge, and were ironing the canvas to the original one. The team who was doing, there were about 4 people. It was a very small studio at that time, and I was the only female. The job I had to do was helping with making these wax adhesive and assisting the chief. And my very big job was to open and close the curtains for the public. We opened at lunchtime. We opened the curtains for coffee and tea breaks, and people were standing there and just watching.
The Rijksmuseum staff took the opportunity to repair past damage to the canvas and then revarnish the paint surface. Areas like Frans Banningcock's face, where Rembrandt's paint had deteriorated, were retouched. In all, the restoration took about 8 months, and the new, brighter version of the Night Watch went back on show in 1976. Since then, it's had its own permanent guard. But even that guard was not enough to prevent another attack in 1990. A man out of his senses sprayed acid at the painting.
It was in the morning, 11 o'clock. We are the two guards we have duty in this room. I was standing inside of the night watch. He was walking around and a person is coming over the honor gallery. This direction we have a small group of two in the front. He's standing behind, take a small bottle out of his back pocket and spray the acid in the night watch.
So I came up to the guy, turned him around because I didn't know if he had something else in his hand. And he started to shout, I'm an addict, please don't hit me, please don't hit me, he fainted. And then I started with spread some distilled water, we had it in the cans behind the painting on the night watch.
It must have
behind the painting on the night watch.
It must have looked very strange when you spray water over the painting. The night watch was really covered in water and it was in its frame, and it was the only way to get the acid away as soon as possible.
I'm Barry Knut, I'm the artist. You're the artist. To meet you. Well, I pick a lot of different works of art, a lot of masterpieces. But I've sort of done quite a few with the Night Watch because it lends itself to my style.
And what was the source of your inspiration to link these people?
Well, okay, first of all, that's Louise O'Murphy, that's Louis XV's mistress from a painting by Boucher. Let's keep her big butt here, and then let's take the Night Watch. And this is what happens in the original picture. These guys are walking along. But it occurred to me they weren't looking where they were going. So in the art world, if in two paintings, this is when two paintings collide, you're not watching where you're going. Sooner or later, you're going to walk up the ass of Louis XV's mistress. So they could be going anywhere, coming from anywhere. They could be talking about anything. So I want to try to demonstrate alternatives. This is the company of Captain Franz Benny Koch and Lieutenant Willem van Ruytenbusch trying on Helga's underwear. It's subtitled Night Watching. Helga, an Andrew Wyeth painting, sleeps naked with her window open. And of course, since she's nude, she's probably got clothing lying around her studio or whatever. And these guys, they're overdressed anyway, they'll put on anything. I want people to re-look at things, to look at them in a different perspective. Not just as the way the artist or the patron intended it to be looked at, to look at it from, it may be a more contemporary view, but put them in different situations. If you put the same people or characters or images in different environments, they're supposed to react differently. Yet, because they're stable and they're painted, they don't really physically change, but it seems their character changes. So that's what I do, and I change their environment. And it's irony, it's about irony.
He's a complete maniac.
Modern Dutch reworkings of the painting are rarely as unexpected as Barry Kite's, though one did relocate it to the Amsterdam gay scene of the 1970s.
My uncle Willem Koch died a few years ago. He was very famous in the 60s and 70s with a certain group of art lovers. He painted more kind of the more erotic side. He was fond of nightlife himself, and he wanted to make an interpretation of the nightlife in the 60s and 70s. All the figures in the painting are the same ones as Rembrandt's Night Watch. Of course, they are different, but the situation is exactly the same. The weapons they have in their hands, they are all in the same situation. The boy who had the graffiti, that's something he did in his interpretation. I think he did a very good job with this one. It's exactly the same, only it is transformed to these days.
A more conservative Dutch rendition of the great painting can be found at the Delft porcelain factory. It's a full-size version, made up of 480 separate tiles, and was created to celebrate the millennium in Holland. It's the work of two master ceramic painters, Nico de Graaf and Jos van der Giessen. For them, a far cry from painting dishes and vases. It took the two men 14 months to complete.
It's always difficult to reproduce such a masterpiece. You start to realize how cleverly the man has positioned things. So you begin to identify with the painter. Then, yes, in a scene like this, with Rembrandt in your mind, a man who composed this in a very different age and painted it using very different materials, everything begins to come together under your very eyes.
We only have one colour, and that's one of the most difficult things of all, because we are interpreting the painting on our earthenware, so we continuously have the problem. How do we reproduce the colours he used? And if you work in blue, you have to produce a very accurate contrast. But we solved the problem by taking black and white photographs of the painting, which helped to give us the correct shading.
It was a really special feeling to be allowed to copy such an important masterpiece. The fact that we were both given such an opportunity is of course unique. It is fantastic. You really feel it's an honour to be asked to copy such a painting.
The Night Watch is certainly Rembrandt's most monumental painting. Yet it's a monument to a small local event that wasn't of any great consequence, or even fundamentally very serious. Simply the grandeur of Rembrandt's conception has turned this into a national obsession and a masterpiece of Western art.
And the making of a musical masterpiece is examined later tonight. That's the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil in a documentary by Jean-Luc Godard at 10:25. Next tonight, though, a behind-the-scenes look at the creation of a very special Sky Arts collaboration, Ballet Rocks, Dance with a Difference.
Leading the charge is a classical goddess.
This formal classical symbolic figure is very much engaged in street violence, and that's something special, that's something that's not been done before.
It's a painting that continues to haunt us because it captures the euphoria of seizing history and changing it. And it reveals that the price of revolution is paid in blood.
These are not dead heroes, these are sort of dead meat in a sense.
and it's shown in a way that must have been deliberately intended to shock.
The artist who painted it was hardly a man of the people. He complained revolutions got in the way of the agreeable things in life, like dinner parties. The government he painted it for did their best to suppress it. Today, it's become the symbol of modern France. It has adorned French stamps and French money. Liberty now advertises everything from French beer to French guns. It's a revolutionary icon that won't go away. But this celebration of revolt is not what it seems. Today, this picture hangs in the Louvre in Paris, in the Gallery of Great French History Paintings. It was the first painting to celebrate the revolutionary masses storming the barricades. But this picture can leap out of the museum and into the street. In May 1968, students were digging up the streets of Paris to build their own barricades. This painting was a student poster.
Vous avez des images en mai 68 où cette image a été reprise.
In May 68, this image was recycled on posters. And so for us, this woman was the beginning of the battle for the emancipation of women.
Et le début aussi de tout ce combat de l'émancipation des femmes, et puis...
And also, if you like, the fact of having a woman who is, I wouldn't say stripped naked, but all the same with her breasts exposed, it's something provocative, let's say, against a moral order which is collapsing.
C'est aussi une provocation, disons, contre un ordre moral qui s'effondre.
It's a painting which celebrates a city and its history.
Paris invented revolution. It's a French idea. The idea that the people will rise up, throw off their oppressors and establish liberty, equality, fraternity.
But this is not the French Revolution of 1789, the one that sent the King and Queen to the guillotine. We're dealing here with the Revolution of July 1830, when Parisians rose up to replace a tyrant king with a more liberal one. Eugène Delacroix was 32 years old when he painted this work. He was right in the middle of the fighting, an excited spectator, as he indicated in a letter to his nephew.
What do you make of these events? Isn't this century incredible? For 3 days we've lived through cannonballs and rifle fire. An ordinary pedestrian like me ran the same risk of being shot dead as the makeshift heroes who marched against the enemy with bits of iron tied to their broomstick handles.
One eyewitness saw Delacroix in the streets during the uprising. He was no less than Alexandre Dumas, author of The Three Musketeers. He thought Delacroix was a bit of a wimp.
I saw Delacroix near the Pont d'Arcole on the 27th of July. He was looking at the sort of men you see in revolutionary times. They were sharpening their blades on the pavement. Delacroix looked scared, I can tell you. But when he saw the flag floating above Notre Dame, he couldn't contain himself. He started singing the praises of men who had terrified him a minute ago.
In Delacroix's painting, we see a tiny flag on top of Notre Dame. The same flag, on a huge scale, dominates the picture. Red, white and blue sing out of the painting. The tricolour first appeared at the time of the French Revolution. This flag flew over the Revolutionary Wars and Napoleon's armies, but with his defeat at Waterloo, it disappeared. So in the uprising of 1830, the return of the flag was charged with emotion.
What appears on the streets suddenly, like a kind of a miracle, is the tricolor flag. And I think this is an interesting thing because it really tells us something about a whole generation of Frenchmen and French women striving to recover what you might call their pride, their national pride, to wash away this, this humiliation of defeat, of regressive politics, of a return of the king, as if the revolution had never happened.
The romantic conviction that all men were born free united a very motley crew beneath this flag. There were radical Republicans. There were the middle classes who wanted to make money. And there were those who were nostalgic for the glories of Napoleon's empire. Delacroix himself was a child of that empire, almost literally, since his father had served Bonaparte as a foreign minister. His brothers had fought for France under the Tricolore, and the family fortune vanished with the restoration of the monarchy. It was a distinguished background, yet Delacroix in some ways was as desperate as the men who populate his picture.
Je crois que ce qu'il ne faut pas oublier, c'est que Charles Delacroix.
We mustn't forget that Delacroix's father was one of those who voted for the death of Louis XVI. That means that when the royal family was re-established in France, the name Delacroix wasn't a good one to have.
Delacroix n'était pas très bien porté et pas bien apprécié du tout.
Just 3 months after the July Revolution, Delacroix started work on his canvas. He wrote to his brother,
"My bad mood is vanishing thanks to hard work. I've embarked on a modern subject, a barricade. And if I haven't fought for my country, at least I'll paint for her."
Delacroix had found his subject. In his studio on the Quai Voltaire, overlooking the Seine, he created Liberty Leading the People, turning the events he had lived through into a huge history painting. It measured 9 feet by 11, a size achieved by sewing 3 canvases together. He painted it in just 3 months. The speed at which Delacroix worked is visible in the rough paint. It was a very different technique from the masters who preceded him, such as Jacques-Louis David and his school of neoclassicism.
In terms of neoclassical brushwork, you brushed out your personality within it because you couldn't see the hand of a human being. They were painted so perfectly. But here you can tell there's something happening, and that the process of the painting is very important, and the energy that went into the painting. You'll be able to see brushwork everywhere, all over the painting, and that's him showing his mark as an artist, but also it probably shows his processes, the fact that he painted it very quickly, almost in an excitable, feverish state, you imagine, staying up late, painting it, to get it out really, like you'd get out a newspaper the next morning after something had happened.
Delacroix may have been a rebel in the way he applied the paint, but he took what he needed from his teachers. His corpses owe a lot to these bodies, painted by a favourite artist of Napoleon, Antoine-Jean Gros. An exhibition of Gros' paintings had opened just as Delacroix began work on his masterpiece. Since the downfall of Napoleon, these canvases had been suppressed. Now they had a new impact. Delacroix was astonished by Gros' painting of Bonaparte on a battlefield on the edge of Russia. He wrote in his journal,
"Gros dared to make real corpses. He knew how to paint sweat and piles of bodies amidst the dirt. The artist reveals an abandoned rifle with a rusty bayonet which is covered with tiny blood-stained crystals of
ice.
I think one of the things that Delacroix was particularly interested in Gros' work was the way in which Gros could take the stuff of everyday life, like military uniforms or even dead bodies, and turn them into a kind of poetry, turn them into something greater than themselves.
The hand of another of Delacroix's masters is visible in the body on the right, an officer in the Royal Guard killed by the revolutionary mob. The figure was probably inspired by this painting of a soldier, a work Delacroix saw when he visited the artist on his deathbed. Théodore Géricault was one of the strangest geniuses of French art. Before he died at the age of 32, Géricault was convulsed by a gruesomely realistic vision. He gave his young friend Delacroix a part in his greatest masterpiece, a portrait of the artist as a corpse in a spectacular maritime disaster. The model for this figure, face down with a splendid mane of hair, was Eugène Delacroix. Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa, painted in 1819, depicted the aftermath of a scandalous shipwreck involving crimes ranging from inept seamanship to cannibalism. A news story, but raised by Géricault to a new spiritual dimension.
He had taken an event of modern life and turned it into something really incredibly monumental and powerful. And I think Delacroix understood that. And he was probably also a little freaked out by that, the idea that this is possible to do.
Géricault struggled to shape a nightmarish shipwreck. His solution lay in a classical composition. A huge triangle gave form to the canvases of Géricault and Delacroix. The pyramid was a conventional way for academic artists to organize a big painting.
It also, of course, gave him that wonderful apex in which he could have the fist holding the flag to cement the symbolic value of the picture.
The idea of turning a contemporary event into a mythical image had been successfully brought off by Géricault. The equivalent news story for Delacroix turned out to be a revolution nobody expected. For 6 years, Charles X had ruled France at the head of a reactionary royalist government. When he tried to abolish the freedom of the press and dissolve the newly elected assembly, Paris exploded. The centre of the battle for control of the city was the Pont d'Arcole. The revolutionary forces were trying to cross the bridge to capture the town hall on the other side. This seems to be the location of Delacroix's painting, though no vantage point actually gives this view of Notre Dame with these houses in front. But then, this isn't a literal painting. It's a street scene with a goddess in the middle. By putting liberty on a barricade in the centre of the city, a Greek goddess clutching a modern rifle, Delacroix created an unforgettable image. Partly a street fighter, partly an Amazon warrior from classical mythology, and also the French Republic, up in arms. Since 1792, the Republic of France had been represented by a woman in classical dress. She wore a Phrygian bonnet, the symbol of freedom for the slaves of ancient Rome. Delacroix deliberately took this classical figure and smeared her with the dirt of battle.
He did an amazing thing, probably unconsciously, but he did an extraordinary thing, which is he made a real allegory in the sense that he took something that had been absolutely traditional, the idea that you personify a virtue or something desirable, as a woman, and often as a half-naked woman. This was common to ideas of the state, of justice, of virtue herself, and it goes right back to ancient Greece. But Delacroix, by giving her that gun, and by also painting her in this very realistic way, made her look like a real woman. And that made the figure not only incredibly powerful to behold, but also very controversial.
Liberty is beautiful in this painting. But Liberty is also slightly terrifying. She's a kind of colossus, and she's statuesque, and her face is not really looking, certainly not looking with any tenderness on the people. She doesn't seem to care whether they live or die.
Delacroix found a way to turn the classical figure of the French state into something explosive.
She's not a static, statuesque figure. She's gyrating, she's on a twist. And if you look closely, you can see her hair is flying in one direction, her girdle is flying in another direction, and she's a very, very dynamic figure.
Delacroix's Liberty looks incredibly lifelike, but we have no idea whether he used a live model. Certainly, she reflected the prominent role of women in the 1830 revolution. Fighting females were celebrated in pamphlets and broadsheets. And poets were already working on the idea of Liberty as a powerful, sexy woman. Even as Delacroix was painting his picture, Auguste Barbier was recording his own sensual vision in words.
The truth is that Liberty is not some countess from the posh Faubourg Saint-Germain, a lady who faints at the slightest sound, who's covered in powder and makeup. She's a strong woman with thrusting breasts, a harsh voice and a hard charm, who with her bronzed skin and her flashing eyes walks with great strides, delights in the shouts of the people, in the bloody crowd, in the ominous drum rolls, in the smell of gunpowder, in the distant tolling of church bells and the roar of the cannon, who takes her lovers only from the people, who lends her thighs only to those who are strong, like her, and who wish to embrace her with arms soaked in gore.
Liberty looks like a revolutionary woman of the streets, but Delacroix first created her for a very different conflict, the Greek War of Independence. The Greeks, a downtrodden people, were fighting for freedom against the domination of the Ottoman Empire.
All of a sudden, the Greek War of Independence, these little people rising against a big power, gave everyone hope that they could do the same on every possible level, social, artistic, aesthetic, literary, what have you. So in that sense, it acquired symbolic significance for the Romantics.
10 years before the 1830 revolution, Delacroix is sketching these images of a heroic Greek woman rising up. These dynamic drawings are his first drafts of Liberty. But they never led to an epic painting of Greece liberated. Badly. Delacroix ended up painting an allegory of Greece helpless on the ruins of defeat. It shocked the critics. His figure of Greece didn't resemble a classical goddess. She broke the rules, like his figure of Liberty would.
People read this painting against the academic standards of the time, which were these ideal marble-like Venuses with the perfect complexions, you know, we could say like powder puff complexions. Well, certainly Greece doesn't have a powder puff complexion. She's a Mediterranean, she's olive-skinned. Delacroix knew that very well.
The figure was put on hold for several years, until political events gave Delacroix the chance to place Liberty in the centre of Paris, on a barricade. In 1830, it was a new invention. This was the first revolution that saw the streets torn up to create these barriers.
There is no other nation on earth which builds such classy barricades as do the French, that at the drop of a hat they will build a barricade almost as if it's in their genes.
The reason the barricades were thrown up so quickly is that many of the rebels had fought their way through Europe as soldiers in Napoleon's army.
You dug up the paving stones of Paris, you chopped down a few trees and you chucked any old bits of rubbish or furniture you could find onto the pile. But this was something fairly new, and I think it was probably something that a lot of soldiers had learnt during the Napoleonic Wars, and I think this was a tactic that people had become familiar with in real wars, and this was the first time it was really seriously done in a civil war. So it became afterwards a symbol of the people in arms.
Even so, the barricade Delacroix presents is strange. It doesn't look like a barrier designed to stop the king's troops. Though it runs across the middle of the picture, it's difficult to see. In effect, it's more like a stage on which his characters stand.
On voit Delacroix, d'ailleurs, qui accorde une importance.
Delacroix gave the barricade considerable importance because he signed in red on the barricade, almost in the centre of the painting, affirming his identity as an artist who had to express himself with this mythical image.
Delacroix had created a stage. He had his leading lady. So where would he find the rest of the cast to put alongside her? It's possible he found them in this print by Nicolas Charlet, a prolific illustrator and popular artist.
We know that Delacroix was a little bit terrified by the revolution. He didn't go out on the streets very much. He probably hid at home most of the time. So if he needed an image of the people, where would he go? Well, my sense is that he would have turned to Charlet, to this particular print even, because, as he later said about Charlet, this was a guy who more than anyone else was able to capture the peculiar energy of the Parisians.
Charlet's drawings suggest several figures in Delacroix's crowd. An excited boy, a young man with his hat at a jaunty bohemian angle, a man with a face distorted by aggression. There's an almost one-to-one match between Charlet's characters and Delacroix's painting.
It's a good example, I think, of how Delacroix, as much as he wanted to paint contemporary history, was not a realist. His work is always mediated by other artists, and in this case, it's not an artist of the grand tradition.
Delacroix was deliberately placing the lower depths of society within the frame of high art. He painted a work of history that was destined for the Salon and the Louvre, but it featured a mob, a rabble.
He looks like an urchin who, yesterday he was throwing stones at somebody and today he's picked up pistols and he's fighting for liberty. And so Delacroix is saying that the spirit of France, the spirit of freedom, belongs to those people. It belongs to the scum of the people.
Liberty leading the people is the starting point of the bohemian myth that will fuel the art of Paris in the 19th and 20th centuries. The children of these characters, the thieves and prostitutes, will be painted by Toulouse-Lautrec and Picasso.
It's a bohemian revolution. Delacroix may not have been a political radical, but he was an artistic radical, and I think he puts romanticism into this painting. Who is the man in the top hat, the sort of at a very raffish angle, kind of cocked angle? What he looks like is a student gone to seed, a poet gone to seed, perhaps even a painter gone to seed.
The man in the wonky hat was long believed to be a self-portrait, but Delacroix, the well-groomed dandy, didn't look like this wild-eyed adventurer. The crowd seemed to be possessed by revolutionary fervour, transported out of their everyday lives by a new force, romanticism.
One of the things about Romanticism was it was about the force of nature, about a dread of nature, in awe of it. And here nature isn't, as we'd understand it, in terms of the weather or a volcano, it's actually human beings. It's the masses. And so they are the force of nature, and they are what inspires dread within us, and fear, but also respect.
The painting is about risk. These people are risking everything. That's why death is such a prominent part of it. The painting very unequivocally says these people are risking death, perhaps even courting death. They seem almost to be hurling themselves towards the guns. They are desperate to die. It's that sense of absolute risk. That is romanticism.
These characters are sketches for a new society. Children are in the vanguard of this revolution.
In periods where big struggles, civil wars are going on, children become deeply affected by the world around them. And because they lack, if you like, the maturity of their parents or grandparents, and they have this innocence, they are prepared to take big risks. There are amazing photographs which we've seen from Vietnam, from Palestine, from Iraq today, of children coming out and doing things which grown-ups would think 10 times before they actually did them.
Delacroix's figures advance across a disturbing series of corpses. Is this the price we must pay for liberty? The dead soldiers are members of the king's elite guard, killed by the advancing revolution.
One of the great tragedies of civil war is that it's really a war among brothers, or a war among family. And you end up killing people who might be your next door neighbor. In other words, you're shooting at a royal guardsman because he's wearing the uniform of a royal guardsman. It's as if Delacroix is saying, let us not forget that our brothers and sisters have died in this thing, and that in many cases we've killed them.
Another popular print probably suggested the shape of the corpse on the left. But Delacroix takes it much further, stripping the man of his trousers and his dignity. The painting is given depth by its control of colour and shafts of light. Behind the mob, the revolution and parts of Paris appear and disappear through clouds of smoke.
What it suggests is that the smoke that you see boiling up from the city on fire behind, that smoke is probably drifting and is blocking the light. So that what you're actually getting is a cinematic effect of moving light and shade over the scene. The light allows us to look at it in a jagged way. We don't feel this as a quiet, still thing. We feel this as something that's pulling us this way or that.
Louis-Philippe, the citizen king as he called himself, emerged victorious from the 1830 revolution. 1,000 civilians died to bring this liberal member of the French royal family to the throne. In the Palais Luxembourg in Paris, Delacroix unveiled his picture at the Salon of May 1831, the official exhibition where artists hoped their history paintings would be bought by the state. In the Salon, other painters unveiled their accounts of the revolution. We see a brave citizen protecting a soldier from the angry mob. We see the people doing their duty on the front line. Delacroix's painting is quite different. It features naked evidence of looting. This boy's ammunition pouch has been lifted from a member of the Royal Guard. The youth on the left wears a police hat stolen from the National Guard. This man's sabre and sash have been taken from an elite infantry regiment.
Some of his characters are wearing bits and pieces of uniforms that they've stolen off of dead bodies. There is, in fact, a body in the lower left-hand corner that's partially undressed. What happened to his pants? Somebody took it and went away with it. So it's a picture which is not being judgmental about that sort of thing. It's not trying to sanitize the revolution. It's not trying to turn all the revolutionaries into good people.
This painting by Horace Vernet was more on message. It depicts Louis-Philippe riding out to be acclaimed by the crowd. It celebrates the revolution as a moment of unity. Delacroix's mob upset the critics.
Obviously, not all the men in the crowd had Greek profiles. Their features were coarse, their clothes were torn and dirty. Monsieur Delacroix has exaggerated all this with great pleasure. He could have ennobled these heads with an expression of courage, but he distorted the truth by giving these brave men the appearance of bandits preparing an ambush.
What he's getting at in this painting is the contradictory nature of revolution. Revolution is about ideals destroyed by reality, compromised by reality. So it's about, what makes things exciting and positive and forward-looking, and also about disillusionment. And I think visual works of art can convey ambiguities. You can have both things at the same time.
The critics were particularly upset by the goddess of liberty. She certainly didn't look like an allegorical figure. The way that allegory usually worked in Delacroix's day was that the gods and goddesses floated above the action. They didn't get their hands dirty. And in 1831, the critics thought liberty was decidedly dirty.
Oh, Monsieur Delacroix, you should have cleaned up your child. Lord, is she dirty. How could you have given her young face a breast that is so filthy?
Il met son symbole dans la scène, mais au lieu de lui donner une...
He's staging a symbolic scene, but instead of a symbolic form, he's given her a real woman's body. Bared breasts and hair under her arms, striding forward violently. Some critics were shocked, saying, this isn't an allegory of liberty, but a woman from the fish market.
Et là, non pas une allégorie de la liberté, mais une poissarde.
The immediate fate of Delacroix's painting was an odd one. The government bought it for 3,000 francs, but then it vanished. The awkward truth was that his image of July 1830 managed to upset almost everybody.
It would upset the supporters of the old regime because it shows brave soldiers of France slaughtered in the streets. It would upset the new regime for very similar reasons. You don't want to show that they are a government that's come to power by such methods and that somehow they depend on the mob for their power. And yet for the radicals themselves, the sort of people who are actually portrayed in the painting, it would be a reminder to them that they hadn't actually got what they wanted.
Just a few years after the 1831 Salon, a painting of revolutionaries on the barricade seemed subversive. The government quietly returned it to the artist, and it mouldered away in his aunt's house in the country. A revolution brought Louis-Philippe to power, and now a revolution sent him packing. In 1848, the barricades were back on the streets of Paris, and the citizen king was driven into exile. By now, Delacroix was firmly against revolution. He wrote to a friend poking fun at the great French philosopher associated with revolt.
Rousseau said he preferred liberty mixed with danger to peaceful slavery. I'm afraid I've come to the opposite conclusion. I think liberty won on the battlefield isn't liberty at all. Liberty consists of coming and going peacefully, having dinner whenever you like, and other pleasures that political disturbances get in the way of. Please forgive my reactionary sentiments.
In 1855, the Universal Paris exhibition honoured Delacroix with a one-man show. But his painting of a barricade was excluded because it was thought too provocative. The new emperor, Napoleon III, was roped into the controversy. The artist protested that his painting should not be considered subversive.
This work depicts an event which belongs to history. It seems to me that under your powerful government, itself the result of a great national upheaval, this painting could be rescued from obscurity.
The man Delacroix was really up against was Count Alfred de Neverkerker, Minister of Culture. He'd written to the Emperor's secretary, warning him against this dangerous icon.
I hope you informed His Imperial Highness of the powerful reasons which, in my opinion, militate against showing a picture depicting liberty in a red bonnet on top of a barricade with French soldiers trampled beneath the feet of the rioters.
Delacroix won the day.
his painting went back on show to the public. In 1874, 11 years after Delacroix's death, his Liberty entered the Louvre, and he joined the pantheon of France's greatest artists. At the time, a fierce debate was in progress about how France should be represented symbolically. The Republic had always been personified as a woman. Now she took on the name of Marianne.
There were debates about things like, should your female symbol carry a weapon? Should she be standing up or sitting down? Should she be wearing a Phrygian bonnet, which symbolises revolution, or perhaps a crown, which symbolises the state? What should her face be like? Should she be smiling reassuringly? Should she look maternal? Should she be holding babies in her arms?
On the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, a gigantic bronze monument to the Republic was created by the sculptor Jules Dalou. He was a fan of Delacroix, and it showed in his work. Dalou's figure is wearing a classical tunic which has slipped off her shoulder in the same way as Delacroix's, bearing one breast. She strides forward dynamically. Dalou found a way to combine Marianne with the energy of Delacroix's figure. Liberty, once denounced as a fishwife, was beginning to command respect. But it was the 20th century that would give her an even more central role, as the emblem of the state. In August 1944, barricades again sprang up across the centre of Paris. The people rose up and engaged the Nazi troops occupying the city in fierce fighting. Eerily, the newsreels captured this reenactment of Delacroix's picture. When General de Gaulle called a referendum to establish a government for the newly liberated France, the announcement carried a reproduction of Delacroix's Liberty. In the post-war years, this image became the symbol not just of the French Revolution, or even of liberty, but of France herself. She lent her energy to the postage stamps, and her integrity to the money. This figure, who once upset the critics because she had dirt smeared on her breasts and hair under her arms, now travels the world as the ambassador of her nation.
This idea of French nationhood is something the French obviously are very proud to have a sexy woman representing the central ideals of their nation, which is liberty and equality and fraternity. And so it would be better than, say, a chicken or a cockerel. Much more interesting. Much more sexy, much more enjoyable all around. Yeah.
In May 1968, a new generation of students launched a new kind of revolution. They built barricades as a kind of homage to their ideals of liberty and revolt.
Quand on voit cette image, la révolution part à l'assaut des barricades.
When you look at the picture, the revolution is charging the barricades, charges the barricades and leaves the barricades behind. For us, the barricades had a different significance. They were more of a protection against the police, but in '68 the barricades were more symbolic than real. When you have a movement that wants to look revolutionary, it needs these barricades. The barricade is part of the mythology of revolution.
La barricade fait partie de l'eschatologie révolutionnaire.
In the age of mass media and instant celebrity, the May 1968 revolution created its own version of liberty. A young woman, Caroline de Bendon, took part in one of France's biggest demonstrations.
The guy who was next to me asked me if I could hold a flag. And as my feet were aching, It's quite a long walk, you know, from République to Denfert-Rochereau. I don't know if you can imagine. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to have a ride. And so I got up on his shoulders and he gave me this flag and I held it up.
There was a flurry of activity around Caroline, as several photographers were lured by this striking image.
That photograph was on the cover of Paris Match. It was used all over the world by the news media of the time. And it was a very strange feeling it created because it brought back memories of the painting. And often in that period, the Delacroix painting was used, and the woman on the shoulders of the guy in that photograph was often compared to Liberty, which made people think that Delacroix had probably got it exactly right.
The irony was that Caroline wasn't a student. She wasn't even French. She came from an aristocratic English family. Her wealthy grandfather wasn't amused that she had become the face of international revolution.
My grandfather summoned me to his house in Biarritz, and so I went down there and had a big row with him, and he didn't like the way I was dressed, and he didn't like anything, he didn't like the photo.
Caroline was cut off by her grandfather without a penny. A high price to pay for the role of Liberty, 60s style. But she has no regrets.
Well, it's a good photo, yes, I must say. At least I'm not walking on dead bodies like the Delacroix is. You know, the people under me are alive.
In South Africa, Delacroix's painting has been restaged. Rashada Krauss wanted to pay tribute to the way the revolution in her country ended in a peaceful negotiation, not a bloodbath. Her huge painting features the stars of South African theatre. This is Liberty as a celebration of life.
She'll be more of a traditional woman in the sense that she won't be surrounded by the dead. She will be represented by her own band of gypsies, intellectuals, playwrights, actors, who staged their revolution with their intellect. They did not go out and fight with guns. And that is what artists do in general. So this painting is also about celebrating what artists do and the way that they fight. They fight with their minds. They don't fight with sticks and stones and guns and blood and violence.
Casting the role of Liberty was politically a tricky question.
Obviously the idea of having a black woman came to mind. It seemed like a sort of solution that I should go for. But I realized whoever my Liberty is going to be, it's got to work in the same sense that Delacroix's Liberty worked. You can't just take someone who's been a wonderful person in a country and turn them into Liberty. They have to have that look, they have to have the right body, they have to have the right profile.
Rashada's theatrical solution to the colour question was to use a white actress and put dark makeup on her to make her look mixed race.
We did a series of poses and photographs. Rashada painted my body and we kind of got the shade of bronze that she wanted. I was about 2.5, 3 months pregnant, and it had changed my body. I think in some ways it had begun to soften already, and certainly my breasts were a lot fuller, and I felt a fullness, a swelling, you know.
But I had thought out this image all on my own. I think people would perhaps think that I was a little mad, but I can get away with it because of the reference. And I like the reference because I love the original painting, the original Liberty, because she's just remarkably, gloriously beautiful.
One reason Delacroix's Liberty stays with us is that she has become part of the way in which we see history as a series of images. The artist Jeremy Della is fascinated by history in paintings and history on the streets. He made this video of a celebration of the French Revolution to record how Delacroix's painting can come to life.
Well, every year on Bastille Day, Maison Berthaud, which is a small cafe in Soho, puts on a tableau, a sort of living theatre, street theatre, outside a cafe. and it reenacts parts of the French Revolution, and liberty appears in that film. And I just love it, the fact that it stops the traffic and people stand around and watch it and cheer on and boo and hiss, and it's a form of pantomime as well, political pantomime.
Today, Delacroix's Liberty has become part of our visual repertory. The image is so strong that it can be seen everywhere, from advertising campaigns to political satire. She's a cartoonist's dream. Everyone from Tony Blair to President Chirac is queuing up for his 15 minutes on the barricade of fame.
In cartooning, we always go for the cliche. We're relentless in pursuit of cliches, things that we can repeat again and again, things that we can exploit. Well, we're looking at cliches in order to undermine them, to overturn them, and to play with them, and to lard them up with irony and stuff. And it's a wonderful vehicle for that because it's such a clear image.
Steve Bell is only too pleased to draw the pistol-packing boy alongside Liberty as George W. Bush.
That does create a frisson of absurdity, because the politicians one generally inserts are not idealistic, they're always up to something else, or you're trying to sort of subvert so you're sort of subverting the painting, you're also subverting the politician at the same time.
No matter how many times the image is recycled, Delacroix's Liberty still holds a sense of shock. The way the crowd is surging towards you, about to engulf you.
This is a picture that's coming at you, in which you feel very powerfully that it wants something of you. Delacroix, when he saw and wrote about the Jericho, after the Medusa, he said, "Picture, what do you want of me?" And I think that same question, Liberty Leading the People asks every one of us. Take sides. Where do you stand?
Delacroix, the reluctant revolutionary, broke the rules of history painting. He painted a revolution that never ended.
May 1840. The annual exhibition at the Royal Academy in London has been a great success. On display, all the reviewers agree, is one indisputable masterpiece. Painted by Edwin Landseer, it's called Laying Down the Law. And it features, as the learned judge, a poodle. It is, the critics' chorus, perfect. Perfect in execution, taste, and refinement. But there's another painting hanging in the 1840 show about which the critics are also absolutely unanimous, in dismay and scorn. J.M.W. Turner's Slave Ship. How is it that we can see a masterpiece while the critics compared it to a kitchen accident or the contents of a spittoon? Had Turner gone over the top with this voyage into a sweaty nightmare? This fantastical image of slaves cruelly murdered at sea. Why had a work Turner had hoped would make people weep instead moved them to describe it as a detestable absurdity? What was it about this particular painting, the consummation of Turner's career, that brought down on his head such a storm of abuse? We all think we know Turner, don't we? He seems as comfortably British as a cup of tea. He is, after all, the National Gallery's all-time favourite. But there was another Turner, the Turner you don't know, the painter of chaos, conflagration and apocalypse, wild and ambitious paintings that one critic called a picture of nothing and very like. Well, this is my Turner, extreme Turner, the Cockney poet just short of madness, the Turner we ought to know, the Turner we really ought to revere. This Turner was on a delirious visionary trip that would culminate in the greatest British painting of the 19th century, the slave ship.
That's very fun.
Years before the heroic fiasco of the slave ship, young Turner could do no wrong. In his 20s, the barber's son had already been tipped as the next great thing in British painting. With a dab of his brush, he could wave fairy dust over the genteel British countryside, and it would turn into a place of sublime enchantment. And the quality ate it up. Britain was fighting for its life against the French, and the romance of Albion had never been deeper into the national imagination. Turner, meanwhile, had been granted a great honour, Fellowship of the Royal Academy, at just 26. Now he had to present them with a picture to mark his entry. He gave them this, which was to say, a shock. Dolbaden Castle in Snowdonia was where a medieval Welsh prince, Owen Goch, had met his end. In reality, it was just a modest pile of stones on a hillside, but Turner pumps up the melodrama, backlights the desolate crag, so that the castle becomes a personification of the defiant prince himself, the tragic symbol of imprisoned liberty. Just in case people didn't get it, he added a little poem.
How awful is the silence of the waste, where nature lifts her mountains to the sky. Majestic solitude, behold the tower, where hapless Owen long imprisoned pined, and wrung his hands for liberty in vain.
Okay, so it's not exactly Keats, but it is Turner reaching for the epic. It's all about atmospherics, not finicky topographical description, because that's what Britain was for Turner, a biological sentiment, an instinct in the blood, an irresistibly operatic arrangement of light, air and water, elemental, heroic, legendary. The painting smoothed the way for the young man into the ranks of the Academy, but it should have put everyone on notice that this was a painter who'd never settle for the charming and the pretty. Turner could have made a perfectly decent living, raking it in from the pleasure and leisure industry. But in his fertile imagination, something grand and bloody was already stirring. But he still had a fortune to make. He wasn't ready yet to be the maker of dark epics. It was time to enjoy being J.M.W. Turner, R.A. He's rolling in money and commissions, and he buys a West End house for his pictures, himself and his old dad, whom he shamelessly turns into his all-purpose servant. Old Dad would stretch and prime canvases. Old Dad would patrol the gallery. Old Dad would tend the vegetable garden out by the river and revel in his son's fame and fortune. Good old Dad. But then, conventional family ties don't seem to mean much to Turner. There's no dutiful Mrs. T at home. Marriage and art don't go together, he said. So instead, he takes as a lover the widow of a friend, Sarah Danby, and installs her round the corner. He even has 2 children by her. More illicitly still, Sarah is the muse of his erotic imagination. His drawings suggest he takes as much pleasure in sex as a full moon over buttermere. It wasn't until Turner's will was published that anyone knew about Sarah Danby and the children. And the erotica remains strictly under wraps in his lifetime.
Turner chose to live part of his life amidst the shadows of secret fantasies, but when he emerged from this world and strolled beside the Thames, he indulged in another fantasy, as he lived in a country from which poverty, hunger and misery had been banished. Place where the romance of England came to him with lyrical intensity. A place of almost narcotic serenity. This is the pleasure-seeking, public-pleasing Turner. And perhaps he could have settled for this mellow dream world, gently stroking the self-satisfaction of Regency England. But even as he drifted through his home county's Eden, Turner must have been aware that alongside his idyll there was another England, an England in distress, and something in Turner wanted to paint that England too. For this was the early 1800s, the rockiest years in all modern British history, the time when the distance between the fantasy Britain and the reality was at its widest. The kingdom was supposed to be a model of political and social stability, but there was massive unemployment, hunger, anger, rick burning in the countryside, machine smashing in the towns, the bloody war with Napoleon's France grinding on and on. These are hard times, radical times. So Turner produces a gritty image of rough Britannia. What's your most delicious fantasy of old England? Summertime? A picnic? Well, here's a hard-bitten winter dawn, and it's no picnic. Slung around the shoulders of a girl. Rutted tracks. Two men digging a ditch, or is it a grave? You can feel the tough work of it in that hard, frozen soil. Everything impassive, unsentimental, dour. How things really are. When did Constable ever do winter in the north? Why would Turner ever do something so flinty? Well, in Yorkshire, he has become best mates with someone who will change the way he sees the world. Walter Fawkes's view of Britain isn't exactly rose-tinted, and he's not your usual country gent. He's a political militant, the scourge of the old Tory establishment. But the cause that's most dear to this radical toff is the great moral crusade of the day, the abolition of the slave trade. Fawkes's fury seeped into Turner's imagination. One day in 1810, Turner took Fawkes's son for a walk on the Yorkshire moors as a storm brewed. The two of them sketch away. Turner puts his pencil down. "There, Hawkie," he says. "In 2 years you'll see this, and it'll be called Hannibal crossing the Alps." So a squall over the Yorkshire moors turns into a no-holds-barred alpine cataclysm, a simultaneous blizzard and a shaft of sickly sun. Hannibal's army is the victim as it clambers its painful way over the alpine passes. Stragglers picked off by scary mountain men, while a sucking vortex hovers over the scene like some gigantic, malevolent bird of prey. Turner does something tremendous with the storm over the Yorkshire moors. It's not just scenic weather, it's a cosmic reckoning. Hannibal is a hit. People crowded round it so densely the gents couldn't elbow their way in to see it. But why did this picture pull in the crowds? Not because it was a scene from ancient history, but because everybody knew it was also a modern painting, a contemporary story. The comeuppance handed out to another arrogant invader who crossed the Alps in search of glory. The arch-enemy, Napoleon. In a crushing put-down, Turner shrinks the mighty commander to a puny, almost comical figure in the remote background, atop an elephant that looks more like a dung beetle. You have to say this about Turner, though, he's an equal opportunity pessimist. As much as he wants to see the end of Napoleon, he's got a damn funny way of celebrating Waterloo. In 1817, does he paint victorious Wellington and his gallant scarlet squares of embattled grenadiers? No, he gives us a carpet of corpses in the blackness. Wives and sweethearts with their babies, pathetically searching the carnage for their loved ones. An apparition of pure hell. Rather than glorify the Iron Duke, it seems to exemplify one of his pithiest verdicts. The next worst thing to a battle lost is a battle won. No wonder it wasn't until the 1980s that this painting was properly displayed. Turner's refusal to beat the patriotic drum or wag the flag cost him patrons. But with the field of Waterloo, he's reached for something profound. A British art that will act out the suffering of victims. But
then Turner knows all about the lot of the common people. He's no gentleman artist. He was born and grew up in the filthy back alleys of Covent Garden, where every day he rubbed shoulders with the desperate and the destitute. This didn't make his Waterloo or any of his historical epics manifestos for revolution. They are bigger, more disturbing than that. They have washing through them the tragic truth about the powerlessness of ordinary people when faced with atrocity and disaster. People who existed right on the edge. And there was someone in his own life who'd gone right over it. His mother. Mary Turner was a shrieking fury in the painter's house. Driven mad, perhaps, by the death of Turner's younger sister. In 1800, she was incarcerated in Bedlam, disappearing from his life and dying 4 years later in total neglect. In 1800, she was incarcerated in Bedlam, disappearing from his life and dying 4 years later in total neglect. But if Turner abandoned her, could there have been, I wonder, a haunting? Was Mary's howling rage translated into the dark thunder and burning gold of Turner's skies? This much I can say, that an acute, tragic sense of the frailty of human existence framed Turner's life and powers the greatest of his works. So the figures who populate his history paintings are often weirdly invertebrate, so many ragdolls tossed around by the immense forces of fate. Painting these discarded marionettes was particularly willful for someone who'd studied academic figure drawing. But then, despite the fact he's been a fellow at the Academy for nearly 20 years, Turner was proving to be the odd man out in the play-safe world of British art. It's not just what he paints that gets him into trouble with high-class critics. It's the way he paints it. One critic despairs that Turner delights in abstractions that go back to the first chaos of the world. Well, my dears, what would you expect from the grubby little parvenu with his down-market accent and his upmarket house? There's something obstinately coarse that clings to him, a pungent social aroma. When Turner visits France, the painter Delacroix is taken aback that he looks rather like a farmer with unwashed hands. Oh, there's dirt under Turner's nails, all right, but it's likely to be Gamboge yellow or Prussian blue, not farm muck. And the worst thing is that he seems to wear his unwashed hands like a badge of professional pride. When a young gentleman aspirant artist comes to see him, Turner grabs his lily-white hands and growls, "You're no artist." Turner himself uses his fingers to make his art, keeps a nail deliberately untrimmed so he can wield it like a claw to cut into the paint surface. He's no dainty brush flicker. He wipes and scrapes, attacks the surface with a pumice stone, spits into the paint and gives it a good smush. It's this joyous urchin-like wallowing in the muck and slather of paint that Turner's critics found so appalling, and one of them complained about his perpetual need to be extraordinary. Well, yes, how very un-British. But Turner didn't want to be boxed in by what Britain was becoming. An empire of solid, prosaic, commercial facts. He needed something more, a place where the poetic imagination could drift and float. There was one place where not being sound or solid was of the essence, Venice. For 20 years off and on, Turner made the floating city his soulmate. Turner was spellbound and conjured from a wisp here, a daub there, the gauzy radiance of the place. Turner's critics accused him of the cardinal sin of indistinctness. But here in the floating city where everything was liquid and slippery, he could embrace that indistinctness, make it his own particular glory. Turner could have been tranquilized by Venice, seduced into becoming an accomplished supplier of sensuous bliss. But the stagnant beauty of the city made him think of something else. He looked at Venice and he saw death. For most of his life, Turner had been the picture of rude health. Now, he's sick, losing weight, wheezing. He feels the grip of the ancient story of life and death in his very own bones. Mortality eats away at him. His indispensable multitasking old dad had died. Not just his personal jack-of-all-trades, but his best friend. Other cherished intimates, Walter Fawkes, the old radical, had gone too. To keep the aches and pains at bay, he uses a tincture of thornapple to cope, a narcotic which probably sends his always hyperactive visual imagination into planetary orbit. And from his bad dreams gallops a biblical horror.
And I looked, and beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him.
But Turner paints his way out of the nightmare. Look closely. The skeleton is limp. Death is dead. Turner lives to paint on. He won't limply surrender like some consumptive romantic. Instead, he gathers his energies, puts his obsession to work, makes the cycle of life and death, suffering and salvation, the theme of his greatest period of painting.
I'm going to deliver this painting tomorrow, and I'm just doing a little touch-up. It's not much, it's just small things that will enhance the shapes. As my tattooist call it, touch-up. When you are finished, you just do some small adjustments to get more life into it. And it's very easy to kind of fuck it up, so one should be careful. See, now the arm is coming out a little bit more. Just think, I'm working on these huge canvases. First you start with a rough sketch, and then you just keep on building it. The closer you come to the end, or to the point where you want to call it finished, the harder it is to decide when to stop. That was too much. So annoying. I'm not really sure how I decide when to stop, but it's kind of, it's like a thing that just happens. It's a feeling. I'm letting some of this be quite rough because it kind of enhances the light I've been putting into it. And I really like how this turned out. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is quite good. Okay. So, some yellow. So you see I use different colors, kind of like a rainbow, and it's always in the same. I had the whites and the yellows and the reds and the earth colors like Rotenburg, burnt umber, Van Dyke brown, French ultramarine, cobalt, the Prussian blue, Kraplak or Alicerine as it's called. It's raw sienna, no, burnt sienna, raw sienna, cadmium red and vermilion, and some yellows, cadmium yellow, primary yellow and cadmium yellow and some orange. So I just don't have to mix them all, but it's clean colors. It's Old Holland, usually Old Holland or Winsor Newton I've been using until now. Some Michael Harding, but I really do like Old Holland. They have a lot of pigment, not so much oil, so the colors are very good to be used as almost as clay. I think of, as I said many times before, I think of the colors more like clay than paint, actually. And I'm not really interested in paintings that are inside, or I want them to be more expressive, or more, I should say, well, I'm not even able to not to make them expressive, because I think I'm kind of a natural expressionist, with all the intensity that kind of personality brings with it. It makes life burn quite intense. What the hell would the point be if life weren't intense? So, I really enjoyed making this rose. Seriously enjoyed it. That was really, yeah. Okay, I think maybe I should stop there. Yeah. Anyway, get yourself a palette and keep on working. Yeah, doing a touch-up, strengthening some colors. And so demands really deep concentration. was supposed to deliver this painting on Friday, but I guess yeah. Yeah. I think I'll stop now. Okay. So here it is. This painting is painted very thick and very to get this kind of light I have used a lot of thick layers of color. I'm just gonna move it into the light a little bit. I have posted this video once before, but I want to talk a little bit about it, so I'm going to repost it. It is amazing to see how intense the light became. I've worked with these thick, really thick layers of color in the lights. You see the rose here. It's a little bit too yellow maybe on the film, but you can see how I have built this thing, the light. And this is how you do it. This is how the old masters, like Rembrant did it. If you see the cloth and the light parts in his paintings, it's actually the way they are painted. So I'm really pleased with this painting. Probably one of my most beautiful works. I started it in my old studio and just finished it here. It wasn't all finished when I posted the first video, but it's finished now. So it's not that naturalistic in a way. It's more painted more to bring out the light and the. So yeah, I really do feel I managed to do something nice here. So yeah, it's now 9 in the morning and I'm always happy after painting. And I get very thoughtful. Anyway, I'm gonna repost this video because I want to have this comment in it, and you can go to my Facebook pages, and you can also now point the donate button if you learn something from it or if you like to, and you can ask me questions, and please spread my videos on social media, and also press the abonnement button. You know, the more people who are connected to my channel, the better. Yeah. So yeah, there we are. Nothing much to say, I guess. Thanks for watching. And yeah, there will be more videos out. I have a lot of stuff I'm working on, so there will be more coming. Okay, thank you for watching. Yeah, didn't stop. That was silly. Okay. So here you can see some of the textures and brushwork. Now, if you want to support my channel, you can do that by going to Patreon and sign up for $1 or whatever you like. There's also a Patreon giveaway every month, one small painting. So grab your chance and go to Patreon and sign up. Also remember to give a thumbs up, leave a comment, put on a notification bell, and I do hope to see you in the next video. Comments are also very appreciated, so keep them coming.